So now let's look at the development of the embryo and the seed after double fertilization occurs. Usually the endosperm develops before the embryo. That way, there are plenty of nutrients that are available to give that developing embryo the energy that it needs for growth and cellular division. Okay, remember that endosperm is triploid, and it was formed from one sperm and a female cell that contained two polar nuclei. Sometimes the nutrients that are found in the cell that results from this double fertilization remains in the endosperm. An example of this would be the bean plant shown here on the left. In other cases, those nutrients are transferred to two different portions of the developing seed, known as cotyledons. So the first time that a brand new zygote divides, one of the resulting cell anchors the embryo to the parent plant. Okay, remember that seeded plants are very different than seedless plants, and that the embryo is very dependent upon the parent plant in the early stages of its development. So really, we could say that seed plants are good parents, since they do so much to help increase the survival of their seeds. The other of the two cells develops into the embryo. The cell divides many times, and the embryo gets longer and longer. So in this picture here, we see a flower in which fertilization has just occurred, and the zygote is present as a single cell. Here we see the developing embryo. The basal cell is the one that's involved in anchoring the embryo to the parent plant. We then see further cell division of the terminal cell, and we start to see the beginnings of cellular differentiation. The top of this embryo is branching off into two different cotyledons, and the lower portion of the plant is starting to differentiate into the roots. Notice also that a tough seed coat has formed around the developing seed. And eventually, the flower begins to deteriorate and wilt away. That seed coat is so good at protecting the developing embryo that it is possible for the seed to shed lots and lots of water and enter a state of dormancy. Okay, that dormancy means that the metabolism of the developing embryo has slowed down. And the seed is not actually using very much of the energy that's available to it. It can save that energy until conditions are appropriate for germination. When the seed ends up in these favorable conditions, which include nutritious soil and lots of water, then the seed can use the rest of its endosperm to help grow and break out of the seed and continue its development as it gets established in its new environment. Seed dormancy is an extremely beneficial adaptation. seeds don't always find the correct conditions right away, and the ability to wait for germination until the environment is ideal increases the probability of survival of the embryo carried within the seed. When a seed does reach the correct conditions, the uptake of water can be very rapid. Remember that when that seed has undergone dormancy, it's dried out to a great deal. Okay, it's reached a water level of about 5 to 15% of the weight of the seed. Most plants are composed of more than 90% water. So the seed needs a lot of water in order to grow, but the uptake of water is basically automatic. In a wet environment, the water is going to move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So the drier the seed, the more potential it has for taking up water. Okay, so the radicle, which is the embryonic portion of the root, first breaks out of the seed coat and begins absorbing nutrients. That helps the rest of the embryo to grow, and then eventually the tip of the shoot, that's the portion of the plant that'll grow upwards away from the ground, breaks through the soil surface. In lots of eudicots, a hook-shaped structure forms, and you first see a little loop coming out of the soil. And it's the presence of light that guides the plant to grow up straight and keep itself in the correct orientation. Here we can see a dicot forming its germination. Okay, first the radicle comes out of the seed coat. Eventually, as the radicle pushes its way out of the seed, some of the stem portion, also known as a hypocotyl, begins to leave the seed. Eventually, it pushes its way up outside of the soil, and these two cotyledons that have been storing the energy for the plant open up, and the developing leaves inside are then exposed. Now the plant is ready to undergo photosynthesis on its own, and it no longer needs to rely on the cotyledons that are storing the energy from the endosperm for its nourishment. The example of maize at the bottom illustrates a monocot's germination. In both instances, the radicle emerges first, but in the monocot, a separate stem comes up to form the stalk of the plant. The plant is still using up the endosperm that's stored in the seed, and the leaves are beginning to grow as that nourishment is disappearing. Don't worry so much about these terms like coleoptile, hypocotyl, and epicotyl. Okay, but you should know the difference between the monocots and the dicots. Okay, we'll be doing more with monocots and dicots in the lab, but remember that a single endosperm is found in seeds of monocots, and that two pieces known as cotyledons store the energy in dicots. Another important adaptation of angiosperms is the development of a fruit. A fruit develops from the ovary of the plant, and it generally surrounds the seeds. Okay, it's a protective barrier around the seeds, but its primary function is not to nourish the seeds in any way, but to aid in seed dispersal. Some fruits actually provide structures that help seeds to travel in the wind. So the flat portion of this maple seed here is actually the fruit. The seeds can be blown by the wind a lot more effectively with this structure. But most of the tasty fruits that we're very familiar with and that we really enjoy eating are involved in dispersal by animals. The tasty fruit that we can appreciate is also very attractive to lots of animals that consume the entire fruit, seeds and all. Then those seeds can travel through the digestive system of the animal, and as the animal moves around, they're deposited in different areas. It's an advantage of a plant to disperse its seeds away from the parent. That allows the plant to invade lots of different types of habitats and increase the probability of finding a suitable one. A plant may not be able to grow immediately beneath its parent. There may not be enough light, and the plant may also be competing with its parent for water and nutrients. This set of pictures on the left shows the progression of the wilting of a flower at the same time that the ovary is enlarging. We see the remnants of the disintegrating flower here and the beginnings of the formations of some fleshy fruits. Then we see the enlargement of the fruit over several stages, and this portion of the apple here shows what's left over of the flower. Okay, eventually this ripe apple here is ready to eat. Yum! We see several different types of fruits, and there are certainly a lot of things that we like to eat that we don't call fruits, but they actually are fruits from a biological standpoint. Tomatoes and peas are examples of vegetables that are really fruits. Most of the fruits that we're familiar with are called simple fruits. They're ones that arise from a single or several fused carpels. This pea pod is a single fruit because it formed from a single ovary. Aggregate fruits like raspberries and blackberries are formed when flowers have multiple carpels. And that results in the production of lots of little mini fruits that are stuck together and can be eaten all as one. Multiple fruits are formed in a different way. When a group of flowers found together in the same region of a plant, called an inflorescence, form a fruit together, a multiple fruit forms. If you bought a pineapple from the store, you thought you were buying one pineapple, but instead you were buying a multiple fruit. Each of the square-like shapes on the pineapple is the result of a separate flower that was once part of an inflorescence. An accessory fruit can form when other parts of a flower, in addition to the ovaries, contribute to the fruit. In the apples, when we see this little dip at the opposite end of the stem, that's a portion of the fruit that's formed from the remains of the stamens and the styles of the flower that originally produced this apple. Flowering plants have just some incredible diversity. And their fruit can be dispersed not only by wind and animals, but also by water. The fruit of the coconut is adapted well for dispersal across the ocean from island to island, because the coconut seed is the correct density to float. Some of the wind-dispersed fruits are quite amazing. The giant seed of the tropical Asian climbing gourd, pictured here, looks kind of like a hang glider and behaves like one too. When it falls from the tree, it moves in a slow spiral path towards the ground. If a gust of wind comes during its slow descent from the branches to the ground, it can be swept farther away from the parent plant. And the tumbleweed actually has a very interesting mechanism of dispersal as well. A piece of the plant containing seeds breaks off easily from the parent plant and skims across the desert surface. We talked a lot about how fruits are used to attract animals that may eat them and disperse the seeds through their feces. However, other seeds are dispersed by being carried by the animals individually. Squirrels bury thousands of seeds every winter, and often a few forgotten clusters end up as next year's new plants. Ants also carry lots of seeds, and sometimes their leftovers also germinate. A number of other types of flowering plants provide sticky or thorny structures that get stuck to the fur of animals or to the clothes of people. I find this really annoying, but for the plants it works really well. So this wraps up our discussion of angiosperm reproduction and diversity. I hope you found all of the incredibly effective adaptations of various angiosperms quite fascinating.